You know that I throw hands, right? You know that I throw hands, right? You know that I throw hands, right? You know that I throw hands, right?
I still got one bitch, I'ma smack the wig off. And then I'ma change.
I guess you could say jealous and like insecure.
Welcome back. A look at graphic police warrant video played for jurors in the case of a woman accused of plotting to kill her romantic rival. 31-year-old Shakina Thompson is accused of traveling from New York to Tamarac and stabbing her boyfriend's lover to death.
NBC6's Marissa Bagg is live at the Broward County Courthouse with the never-before-seen video of the crime scene you'll see only on 6. Marissa?
Jackie and Jawan, Kayla Hodgson was murdered in her home in Tamarac back in July of 2022. And this video that shows the brutal crime scene, we blurred much of it for you, but we do want to warn you that it is graphic and disturbing. This is the gruesome scene Broward Sheriff's deputies discovered in July of 2022. 23-year-old Kayla Hodgson stabbed dozens of times, lying in her own blood in her Tamarac apartment home. Revelto Robinson found her first that day and called 911.
At 5 a.m. on a quiet July morning in Tamarac, Florida, a disguised figure stepped out of a rideshare car and walked toward an apartment building with a clear objective. Hours later, a 23-year-old woman was found dead inside her home, setting off an investigation that crossed state lines and uncovered a trail of calculated movements, concealed identity, and a connection investigators did not expect. Detectives traced travel records, digital footprints, and physical evidence that pointed to a suspect who had arrived in Florida days earlier under circumstances that suggested planning rather than coincidence. But what exactly brought this individual to the victim's door before sunrise? And why did the confrontation escalate with such precision and speed? As investigators pieced together the timeline, a clearer picture emerged, one that raised serious questions about motive, preparation, and intent. You're watching Global Crime Venue, where viral fame hides chilling secrets. From TikTok dancers and Instagram couples to rising Facebook personalities, we reveal the dark side of the spotlight. When the perfect posts turn into tragedies, we break down exactly how it all unraveled. These aren't just online stories, they're real cases with real victims. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new case breakdown. In our next episode, we'll dive into another shocking story of love, control, and a hidden danger that no one saw coming. Here's the untold side of what really happened. In the months leading up to the incident in Tamarac, investigators later determined that a chain of events began forming around the personal lives of two individuals who did not previously know each other. 31-year-old Shakina Thompson lived in New York, where she maintained an on-and-off relationship with a man whose new romantic connection would ultimately place another person on her radar. This new connection involved 23-year-old Kayla Hodgson, who lived in an apartment complex in the 9300 block of Northwest 57th Street in Tamarac, Florida. As Hodgson's relationship with the man developed, Thompson's attention gradually shifted toward Hodgson's presence in his life. Communications, social media activity, and the changing dynamics of the relationship contributed to Thompson becoming increasingly aware of Hodgson. According to investigative records and later courtroom testimony, Thompson monitored interactions involving Hodgson, noticed social media blocks, and paid attention to online status changes and posts related to the man she had previously dated. During this period, investigators found that Thompson began making plans to travel. Airline data later confirmed that she booked a flight from New York to South Florida, with records showing the transaction occurred shortly before the day she departed. It was noted that the ticket was one-way rather than round-trip, a detail that investigators flagged early in the case. Digital evidence also indicated searches, communications, and movements consistent with planning a trip rather than spontaneous travel. Thompson, who was pregnant at the time, brought luggage that included clothing, personal items, and a knife later identified as consistent with the weapon used in the incident. Investigators also documented that she possessed items intended to obscure her appearance, including a wide-brimmed hat, a face covering, and sunglasses. Additional evidence showed that Thompson arranged rides in South Florida, using an account that prosecutors later described as falsified or created to conceal her identity. This account was used to travel from the airport to other locations in Broward County in the days before the encounter in Hodgson's apartment. While in Florida, location data from Thompson's phone placed her near Hodgson's residence on multiple occasions, suggesting she visited or observed the area prior to the early morning arrival that would later become a central point in the investigation. Meanwhile, Hodgson continued a normal routine in her apartment complex. She maintained communication with friends and family, posted on social media, and engaged in her daily schedule without indication that she was being watched or tracked. The apartment complex itself was typical of the area. Multiple buildings, shared parking areas, and residents who moved in and out at all hours due to varying work schedules. The layout offered multiple entry and exit points, which investigators later used to reconstruct movements captured on surveillance cameras. In the days just before July 13, 2022, Thompson's actions became more defined and traceable. Investigators outlined a timeline that showed her checking into local accommodations, making short trips by rideshare, and purchasing items that aligned with the disguise later described by witnesses and seen in surveillance footage. Though she made no direct contact with Hodgson during this time, the evidence placed her progressively closer to the apartment complex. These observations were supported by phone pings, travel logs, and security footage from nearby businesses. By the night before the incident, Thompson was already within a few miles of Hodgson's residence. Surveillance footage captured Thompson's movements as she prepared for the early morning visit that would later become the focal point of the case. The footage showed a person consistent with Thompson's appearance carrying a bag, wearing a hat, and keeping their face obscured as they moved through dimly lit areas on foot. Investigators documented that she made minimal phone calls, minimized digital activity, and maintained a pattern that indicated deliberate planning rather than accidental presence. In the early hours of July 13, 2022, the investigation later showed that a rideshare car arrived at the Tamarac Village Apartments, located in the 9300 block of Northwest 57th Street in Tamarac, Florida. Surveillance footage captured the passenger stepping out around 5 a.m., wearing a wide-brimmed hat, a face mask, gloves, sunglasses, and dark clothing. The individual walked directly toward the entrance of the apartment building, where 23-year-old Kayla Hodgson lived. Detectives later determined that this precise timing and the use of disguising items indicated preparation rather than a spontaneous visit. According to travel and phone records examined during the investigation, the suspect, identified as 31-year-old Sakina Thompson, had arrived in Florida days earlier. This included flying in from New York, booking transportation under a fraudulent rideshare account, and carrying a large knife and extra clothing. Investigators concluded that these steps showed a clear plan to approach Hodgson's residence without revealing her identity. The surveillance video from the apartment complex showed the suspect entering the building while taking steps to avoid cameras when possible, including adjusting the hat brim and mask to conceal facial features. Inside the building, evidence indicated that Thompson went directly to Hodgson's apartment rather than searching or moving through the hallways aimlessly. Investigators believe she already knew the exact unit number. There were no signs of forced entry, which suggested that the door was either unlocked or opened voluntarily when Thompson knocked. What took place immediately after the door opened formed a central point of dispute throughout the legal process, but physical evidence inside the apartment provided investigators with a structured timeline of events. Inside Hodgson's unit, the living room area showed signs of a sudden physical confrontation. Furniture was disturbed, items were knocked over, and blood evidence was found in multiple locations. Prosecutors later stated that Thompson confronted Hodgson about an ongoing romantic dispute linked to Thompson's former partner. Blood spatter analysis and the distribution of defensive wounds suggested Hodgson attempted to move away from the attacker while sustaining multiple stab wounds in different areas of the room. The medical examiner reported that Hodgson was stabbed dozens of times, with injuries located on the torso, neck, and arms. The pattern of the wounds indicated a prolonged struggle, moving through several parts of the apartment. Blood transfer and smearing suggested efforts by the victim to shield herself or attempt to escape the attacker's reach. Investigators documented that the knife used in the attack came from the suspect's belongings, not from the victim's apartment, reinforcing the timeline that the weapon was brought to the scene beforehand. During later testimony, Thompson claimed that she came only to speak with Hodgson and alleged that the victim struck her with an object and cut her with a piece of broken glass from a hookah before the stabbing occurred. However, investigators reported that the injuries Thompson pointed to were inconsistent with defensive wounds and more consistent with minor scratches or abrasions that could not be conclusively tied to the victim. No significant blood belonging to Thompson was found at the scene, and no evidence supported the presence of an active struggle initiated by Hodgson with a glass object. After the stabbing, investigators found evidence that the suspect attempted to control or alter parts of the scene. This included bloody clothing left behind that did not belong to the victim, indications that the attacker may have removed their original outfit, and smudged blood patterns near the bathroom sink. Prosecutors argued that Thompson changed into Hodgson's clothing before leaving the apartment. Additional evidence indicated that the suspect left the scene without calling for help, contacting emergency responders, or attempting life-saving measures. Instead, the individual exited the building, walked away from the complex, and was later traced through digital and transportation data back toward travel routes leading out of Florida. The discovery of Hodgson's body came later that morning when authorities responded to the apartment. The physical condition of the scene, the blood patterns, the location of the wounds, and the presence of a transported weapon formed the core structure of the investigative narrative developed by law enforcement as they reconstructed the events of what occurred during those early morning hours. When deputies entered the Tamarac apartment on July 13, 2022, they immediately began documenting the environment where the victim was found. The scene provided multiple points of physical evidence, and investigators started assembling the initial timeline by examining the condition of the room, the position of the body, and any visible disturbances inside the apartment. Detectives conducted a systematic search, collecting items that could establish whether someone had entered the residence with preparation or intent. The pattern and extent of injuries on the victim indicated a prolonged encounter, prompting investigators to consider whether the individual responsible had knowledge of the victim's location and routine beforehand. This directed their focus toward communications, travel patterns, and recent interactions involving the victim. Investigators examined electronic data, including phone activity, recent calls, messages, and online interactions. This allowed them to identify communications between the victim and individuals who had potential connections to recent disputes or unresolved personal issues. These findings were placed alongside physical evidence showing that the individual who entered the apartment wore a disguise, which suggested a purposeful effort to conceal identity. Surveillance footage from the complex and surrounding areas was reviewed to track the movements of anyone arriving or leaving in the early morning hours. Detectives eventually located footage showing a person wearing a large hat, face covering, and gloves exiting a rideshare vehicle and walking toward the victim's building shortly before the estimated time of death. The next step involved identifying the rideshare account used for that trip. Investigators discovered that the profile name, photograph, and contact information connected to the account did not match the real individual picked up by the driver. This indicated that the transportation was booked using falsified identity information. Detectives obtained data from the rideshare company, which linked the trip to an IP address and device history that investigators could trace. This pointed them toward an individual located outside Florida, who had recently traveled into the state. Airline records confirmed that this person had flown from New York to South Florida shortly before the homicide. The one-way ticket, paired with the timing of the flight and the subsequent appearance at the apartment complex, became a key part of the investigative sequence. Detectives then reviewed hotel, transportation, and purchase records to determine whether the individual had obtained items consistent with the disguise or the weapon used in the crime. Some receipts and digital location data reflected movements that aligned with the time frame of the killing. Each element strengthened the link between the suspect and the events at the Tamarac residence. Investigators also examined the relationship between the suspect, the victim, and other individuals connected to both parties. Communications revealed previous interactions and conflicts involving the suspect and the victim's romantic associations. Statements from people familiar with the situation helped establish that the suspect had knowledge of where the victim lived and had expressed interest in addressing unresolved issues directly. These accounts provided context for why the suspect had traveled to Florida and why the confrontation occurred inside the victim's apartment rather than in a public setting. Upon receiving the verdict, the judge initiated the sentencing phase, which required a separate hearing to consider the appropriate penalty under Florida law. First-degree murder in Florida carries the possibility of life imprisonment without parole, and prosecutors requested that penalty based on the nature of the evidence. The interstate travel, the disguise used upon arrival at the apartment complex, the false rideshare account, and the number of stab wounds documented in the medical examiner's report. Defense counsel argued for leniency by referencing Thompson's pregnancy at the time of the incident, her testimony claiming self-defense, and her stated intention to have a conversation rather than initiate a violent encounter. The judge allowed both sides to present their final positions to ensure that the sentencing process aligned with procedural requirements. During the hearing, members of the victim's family were given the opportunity to make impact statements as permitted under Florida statutes, which allow relatives to describe how the incident affected them. These statements were addressed directly to the court rather than the defendant and were recorded as part of the official transcript. The judge acknowledged the statements but clarified that the sentencing decision would be based on statutory guidelines, the evidence presented throughout the trial, and the legal parameters surrounding premeditated homicide. Following the statements, the judge detailed the factors considered: the prosecution's demonstration of planning behavior, the travel timeline, the acquisition and use of disguise elements, the documented injuries, and Thompson's own testimony acknowledging that she stabbed Hodgson but claiming she had blacked out during the altercation. The judge noted the discrepancy between the defendant's account and the physical evidence, as well as the jury's unanimous determination that the evidence met the threshold for first-degree murder. The court also referenced the prosecution's argument that the defendant took steps before and after the incident that were inconsistent with the spontaneous act. After outlining the legal basis for the sentence, the judge formally sentenced Sakina Thompson to life in prison without the possibility of parole, which is the mandatory sentence for first-degree premeditated murder in Florida when a death penalty recommendation is not pursued. The court then instructed that Thompson be remanded to the custody of the Florida Department of Corrections to begin serving her sentence. Administrative procedures followed, including fingerprint verification, recording the judgment, and issuing the sentencing documents that would be forwarded to state correctional authorities. Additionally, the court confirmed that Thompson's conviction would remain subject to any future appeals initiated by her defense team, as individuals convicted of first-degree murder maintain the right to file appeals within specified time limits. The judge clarified that any potential appellate processes would not alter the immediate execution of the life sentence unless an appellate court issued a stay or ordered a retrial. The sentencing hearing concluded with the judge advising both legal teams of the formal deadlines for post-trial motions. Thompson was then escorted from the courtroom by deputies, and the official sentencing report was finalized by the clerk of courts. This phase marked the completion of the judicial determination of guilt and the assignment of the legal penalty within the framework established by Florida state law. And that concludes today's case. But remember, this is just one of countless stories the world has yet to uncover. Here on Global Crime Venue, our mission is to uncover the facts, honor the victims who can no longer speak, and make sure their stories are never erased. If what you heard today made you think, know this, more cases are on the way that will shock you, haunt you, and change the way you look at social media and the world around you. Be sure to subscribe, tap the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. New investigations are released regularly, and trust me, you'll want to be here when the next story breaks. Before you leave, share your thoughts in the comments. What stood out to you most in this case? Your voice keeps these stories alive. Until we meet again, stay cautious, stay informed, and never forget, Justice starts with truth. Global crime venue, uncovering the stories behind the screen.